Blizzard's second seasonal server is going live on November 30th, the Season of Discovery. This season is adding a rune engraving system to bring tons of new and pre-existing abilities into the game, with the ultimate goal of changing up the meta of vanilla World of Warcraft. We'll also start off with a level cap of 25, which will be gradually raised over the course of the season. So even if you don't have as much time to dedicate to WoW these days, it's still gonna be pretty easy to see the end game as the season progresses. I have covered every rune in the game that was known pre-release, as well as going over my thoughts on how they will work and just how they will interact with your class. And if you want to see a particular class, they are all time-stamped, so you can go straight there. Keep in mind this was all done pre-release however, so in some cases things are liable to have changed. But either way, it should give you a good base of knowledge of what your class is getting and how it will work. So let's make a start on the clothies and move our way up the armor types from there. When you think of classes that would benefit from updates in vanilla World of Warcraft, Mage is not exactly at the top of that list. I like to call them the first real hero class of World of Warcraft. After all, they are the fastest leveler through AoE farming, they're the best gold maker by an absolute mile. A mage can pull and AoE down entire dungeons, whilst other classes would struggle with 3 to 4 mobs at once. In player versus player, they are extremely dominant due to their mix of powerful CC and burst, and in raiding they are the top performing caster, and they can make themselves free food and water, and they can teleport around the world, or just chill in a major city and sell portals to others. The mage in vanilla is an absolute monster of a class and amazing at quite literally everything. So how is Season of Discovery going to build on this class? Well, for a start, the mage is going to be getting an entirely new role in World of Warcraft that it's never experienced before. That of a healer. As for how good it will be, we don't know that yet, but either way, let's get into it and talk about the mage runes that are currently known in Season of Discovery. I want to cover the mage healing package first, as the spells really fit together with one another. First, we have regeneration. This is your chest rune. This applies a moderate heal over 3 seconds and then marks the target for 30 seconds with a temporal beacon. 100% of arcane damage done will be converted to healing and divided up among all targets affected by a temporal beacon. Now it's important to know this ability is channeled as well, as in the heal over time portion is applied similar to how Mistweaver monks use Soothing Mist, and it appears also to not have a cooldown. Now you may be thinking here, this is atonement healing that priests get in Cataclysm, and yes, it is quite similar to that in that you are dealing damage to then heal your allies. But this is basically the Chronomancer healer type class fantasy, and it exists in Classic before Retail. The potential healing with this also seems very good, especially in AoE situations. AoE is not capped in any form in vanilla, so if you say beaconed a Paladin tank who is just blasting AoE threat, and then pressed Arcane Explosion, if he's got 20 or so mobs hitting him, he's just going to be immortal. His health bar will go back to full with every single Arcane Explosion you cast. Oh, and you're still a mage pressing Arcane Explosion, so you're gonna be doing some great damage as well. You will be double dipping from threat though, from topping the heals and damage, so that could be a bit of a problem. But just before this video went out, I managed to find a rather big change to regeneration, and I'm assuming mass regeneration too, which are definitely worth talking about. The changes are after you cast the regeneration spell, your fire and frost spell damage will be reduced by 50% for 5 minutes, and you won't be able to use Ice Block. I'm assuming these two changes are targeted at PvP, where otherwise the mage will be able to reset kind of infinitely and always be at full health. On the more PvE side of this spell, it seems as though the healing done from arcane damage has been lowered from 100% to 40%, so that is already quite the sizable nerf. I'm assuming this was done for AoE reasons, as I'd already highlighted, but this is also going to affect single target quite a bit. I still think this will be reasonably powerful, you know, but we'll have to see how it plays out on live servers. I can only assume from Blizzard's testing though, that this ability was broken beyond belief to be changed this much. There is also an AoE version of this spell called Mass Regeneration, which will go on your leg rune. This appeared to have a 6-second cooldown from what I could tell. Mass Regeneration heals and marks players within the target's party in a 15-yard range, and applies a beacon for 15 seconds. So it is quite a small AoE, you're going to need people to stack for this, and the beacon is also half the duration of the single target spell. It's basically what Power Word Radiance is for Discipline. This is your big setup for heavy damage coming into your whole party. Again, this seems very strong when paired up with AoE pulls, particularly in dungeons or say, I don't know, 10-man raiding environments. But what if you care more about single target heals, or you just don't have enough things to AoE? I mean, in Classic, it's usually the case that you do care about healing one target more so than your entire party. Well, that's where you have a bit of choice as the Mage healer in which rune you take on your gloves. First, we have Rewind Time. This heals a beacon target for all the damage they've taken over the past 5 seconds. It really depends on the cooldown of this spell as for how viable of a choice it may be, and it can't just be randomly taken as a heal either, as you or another mage will needed to have beaconed the target before this can be cast. This sounds good for when there's going to be large, predictable spikes of damage, maybe from breath attacks from bosses, or encounters where the tank will be stunned. However, there is another spell, one that you will be a bit more familiar with, which can be applied to your gloves as well, and that is a modified version of Arcane Blast. Similar to how it's always been, it will stack up its damage and mana cost up to a total of 4 times. But this new version will also cause you to do bonus healing as well. A max stack Arcane Blast will be 700% extra mana, 60% more damage caused, and 60% more heals. I mean, maybe this is just straight up good enough to be part of a DPS focused arcane build now. And as for arcane missiles, even in Season of Discovery it looks like they can't catch a break. Maybe they'll be getting a rune later on though. Also, Arcane Power, the capstone talent in Arcane, makes spells cost 30% more and for you to do 30% more damage. Is that 30% cost increase just the baseline cost? Or is there max stack Arcane Blast with Arcane Power going to make your Arcane Blast cost 910% more mana? Because that sounds kind of expensive, don't you think? Either way, that's kind of the Mage healing package here. It looks very good in AoE situations. It's probably going to generate a ton of threat though. Saying that, when I think about it, Arcane does get 40% less threat through talents, but will this also affect their heals? Is the spell school of Arcane healing arcane? I mean, maybe, I guess that makes sense, but we don't know yet. Anyways, let's get back around to the runes that will be applied to your chest, as the non-healer mages will also have plenty to look forwards to. First up is Fingers of Frost. This is a really powerful talent that was introduced in the Burning Crusade. It causes your chill effects to have a chance to make your next 2 spells act as if the target were frozen. Okay, so unless you are a healing mage, the other runes on this row basically don't exist if this rune works the way I think it will. I went and tested whether Fingers of Frost could proc from slow immune targets. I did have to do this on live RAF servers on a level 70 mage. Maybe it works differently in vanilla, I don't know. But Fingers of Frost was still proccing as normal. Now Frost is already an amazing leveling spec, great for dungeons, and is played at the start of endgame in vanilla due to tons of mobs being fire immune. Also again, if this is working how it does in later expansions, your Frostbite talent will always proc Fingers of Frost as well. So one of the best PvP classes in the game just got way better. And wait till you hear about what mages will get later. This gets even better than this. So yeah, this rune is going to be very, very powerful. For what it's worth, I think the other 2 runes in this row are playable, but just later on when stat scaling has improved a bit. Burnout increases the spell crit chance with all spells by 15%, but casted spells cost 1% more of your base mana. That seems like a pretty easy trade-off. 15% crit for a small mana increase? Fire mages are gonna love this one once the spec starts to pick up with some later game gearing. Crit as a stat really starts to get better the more of it you have, and with talents such as Ignite, I can see this eventually being the rune that's taken in this row. Finally, for the chest runes is Enlightenment. 10% more damage dealt when over 70% mana, 10% more mana regeneration when below 30% mana. This one kind of has an arcane DPS vibe to it, and it will stack with the Arcane Meditation talent for a total of 25% mana regen whilst casting when you're under 30% mana. That's not half bad, to be honest. Remember, in vanilla, evocation scales with your spirit too. Maybe your Arcane Mage DPSs out there should start theory crafting a build that wants plenty of spirit, so that they can keep those arcane blasts going. If fights are as short as they usually are in vanilla, it has potential. Moving on to the leg runes now, we have Living Flame. It kind of reminds you of Dread Flame from Archimond a little bit, doesn't it? A flame that moves towards the target, leaving fire in its wake that deals damage, lasting 20 seconds. It also says Spellfire damage. That should be fire plus arcane, which means this rune won't be dead content in Molten Core. Presumably. A base damage of 42 is not half bad considering it's hitting all targets. That's about halfway between Arcane Explosion rank 1 and 2 damage-wise, but it's going to tick up to 20 times. I could see this being the pick on AoE farming or dungeon content for sure. Next we have Arcane Surge. This is a big single target nuke for your Arcane Mages, or maybe a big heal for your Arcane Healers. It gains up to 300% increased damage based on your mana remaining. So imagine every 10% of your mana that you have unspent, this is going to add 30% to Arcane Surge's damage. After that, you gain a massive amount of mana regen for the following 8 seconds. This is a modification of a talent from Dragonflight, and I believe is the most up-to-date spell that's been added to Season of Discovery. In Dragonflight, it's a casted spell too, which is a big nuke that refills your mana bar afterwards. Say goodbye to Pom Pyro, say hello to Pom Arcane Surge, maybe? Doesn't quite have the same ring to it. Still, it's a versatile spell that could act as a big nuke in PvP, a massive heal, or just a mana regeneration tool. Looking forward to see what kind of mage builds this fits best into. Finally, for the leg runes is something that will be more familiar to us, Icy Veins. I believe this spell is the same in both TBC and Wrath, 20% spell casting speed and no spell pushback for 20 seconds. Having no spell power pushback is very OP for vanilla in PvP. All casts get pushed back infinitely as long as something is hitting you in vanilla, and now you can just ignore that for 20 seconds. And it's got 20% casting speed on it too, that's pretty great as well. Imagine hunters using Broken Tooth in PvP will be griefing themselves against mages now, since you can ignore casting knockback with Icy Veins, and Fingers of Frost will proc more from the faster attacks. Unless you can arcane shot off Icy Veins, that is, and given that it's a magic buff, you should be able to. But now we're on to the gloves, with only 2 runes left to cover since the other 2 were related to the arcane healer style for the most part. Firstly, Living Bomb makes its way to Classic. Whether you associate this spell more with Baron Geddon or the Wrath of the Lich King Fire Mage, it's a spell that's been in the WoW universe for a long time. In vanilla, however, there is no hot streak talent, so don't think you're going to be getting instant cast Pyroblasts. Also, periodic effects do not crit. I'm just saying if this could crit, you could Fingers of Frost proc it, and, well, that would be something, wouldn't it? Still, if enemies are living for over 12 seconds, which might be a tall order in vanilla to be honest, this is going to put up some really impressive numbers on AoE. Also, if you're AoE leveling, this is just the dream talent to get hold of. Mages already have so many ways to slow enemies, and now you can just run around them in a circle spamming Living Bomb. It should really be strong for that style of play. And I'd probably save the best for last here, Ice Lance. This just has to be overpowered for vanilla in all areas of content. If you look at what mages got for PvP, they got Fingers of Frost, Icy Veins, and Ice Lance. Those are some enormous buffs, which will ensure the mage remains a very popular pick in this area of content. Imagine a melee's hitting you, they proc Frostbite, you get 2 Fingers of Frost, you can Ice Lance them twice into a Nova, and then Frostbolt Ice Lance, and hey, you've just pretty much won any fights in the game. For PvE, assuming that Frostbolt will be proccing Fingers of Frost on slow immune targets, this also seems exceptionally strong, and also very mana efficient, which is never a bad thing in vanilla either. I think this is one of those spells which is a bit too flexible to make sense in vanilla, but hey, we will see how it goes. Maybe it's been tuned down quite heavily, to the point where it doesn't feel so overpowered. And that is the Mage, so far, in Season of Discovery. So let's finish up with some closing thoughts on everything. The healing package seems exceptionally strong on AoE content, and reasonable on single target, possible threat generating machine, which is not ideal. Frost Mage has got some of the best possible talents and abilities Blizzard could have picked from later later expansions. This spec will be nasty in PvP, and PvE too, assuming it works how I think it will. The arcane DPS spec seems interesting and is where the big theory crafting will be done. With short enough fights, maybe it does become the go-to. Also, there's not many enemies that are immune to arcane in vanilla compared to the other two spell schools. The fire option seems solid, but fire as a spec really needs that extra crit, which you start to see much later in the game, like AQ 40 levels of later. And since we're going to be starting at level 25, it might be some time till you see fire mages being popular. The Priest in vanilla World of Warcraft was a class that had its identity cut in half. On one side you have the Light, where you played as a healer. This was an area where the Priest excelled. Their wide toolkit covered strong single target heals, heals over time, and even AoE heals. And where there is Light, there must be Shadow. However, this side of the Priest toolkit found way less viability in vanilla. Shadow had a lot of problems between debuff caps, general damage output, and of course a mana bar which will be spent within the space of a minute. So suffice to say, I'm interested to see how they're going to build on Priest's healing identity in Season of Discovery, but Shadow is what really needs the most help to see more widespread gameplay. Also, it appears you may now be able to choose which Priest racial abilities you want. There have been several new buffs found called Secrets of a Race Name and Anointed by a Race Name, which connect with the races which Priests can be. Alune of course being Night Elf, Undeaf Undead, Light Human or Dwarf, and Lower Troll. I can tell you right now, Dwarf is going to be pretty popular if this is indeed a racial swap. But maybe new synergies appear that favour a different race. Maybe Star Shards from Night Elf becomes overpowered. Who knows? So with that being said, let's make a start on the runes which are currently known for the Priest. And we'll begin with the chest runes. First up is Strength of Soul, making your single target casted heals reduce the remaining duration on Weakened Soul by 4 seconds. Weakened Soul is of course that debuff you get when you power word shield someone. It lasts 15 seconds normally, so more or less after getting 2 single target heals, this debuff with Strength of Soul will have nearly fallen off. Now in PvP this is very strong, but in PvE and vanilla, our word shield isn't anywhere as near as good as it is in Wrath. Also, warrior and druid tanks cannot generate rage from damage taken if damage is being absorbed. Don't forget about that in vanilla as well. If you wanted single target heals on a tank, you'd probably still just downrank a different spell, not use power word shield on cooldown. This is good in PvP though, no doubt about that. Next is Serendipity, a very modified version of it at that. Your flash heals reduce the cast time of your next single target heal or prayer of healing by 20% for 20 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. I don't know if this really changes how much you go about playing the Priest as a healer though. Flash heal is a good emergency cast if somebody needs healing as soon as possible, but it's also quite expensive because of this. Still, even if you are throwing out the odd flash heal here and there, it will be making your next big heal go out that bit faster. Maybe it's not that bad in PvE actually, it's just runes which speed up gameplay can often lead to mana issues. Next is Void Plague, the can we have Vampiric Touch? No, there is already Vampiric Touch at home, of damage over time effects. Not sure whether it's casted as Vampiric Touch has been either, we can't really tell at this early stage. Either way, it should be another good way for Shadow Priest to run out of mana, deal damage. Could also be good on single target, and is more AoE friendly or cleave focused than the other runes on this row. Next is Twisted Faith, a talent that first appears in Cataclysm. It makes Mind Blast and Mind Flay deal 20% increased damage to a target with Shadow Word Pain. A pretty simple single target DPS increase. Don't forget in vanilla, Mind Blast generates bonus threat, because why not? That's vanilla for you, so make sure the tank has some threat built up, because if a buffed Mind Blast crits on your first few globals, that could cause problems. Onto the leg runes now, and we begin with a very familiar spell, which has been a central part of the Priest's healing toolkit ever since the Burning Crusade. That is Prayer of Mending. Sends out a heal that will proc the next time the target takes damage, then we'll jump to a party or raid member and repeat the effect up to 5 times. Another solid PvP tool for the Priest right here, For PvE also seems quite nice. It's not uncommon for tanks and the melee group to be taking a few hits at the same time. I think this is going to be a very efficient heal on a bunch of encounters in Classic, and depending on the mana cost, you may be pressing this off of cooldown. Next is a totally new spell, Homunculi. Break off 3 miniature copies of yourself that attack the current target, reducing their attack speed, attack power, and armor. It's kind of like Shadow Fiend really, but with more of a utility focus for the priest. I wonder how strong these debuffs are too. If we're talking a single target ability that applies debuffs such as Thunderclap for the attack speed slow, Demo Shout for the attack power reduction, and some form of Sunder Armor, that's going to be really powerful. And I'm just saying these new tanking specs in Season of Discovery do not have these core tanking debuffs themselves, so maybe a priest is going to be expected to fill that gap. Or maybe it's just a bit of extra damage and some token debuffs which are better than nothing. The tuning of this ability will really impact how good it will be. Next is Shared Pain. Your Shadow Word Pain also hits up to 2 other targets within 15 yards. This rune is pretty great though. Shadow Priest has always had problems dishing out, well, any form of multi-target damage whatsoever in vanilla. Shadow Word Pain does some okay damage too, so being able to have this instantly applied to 3 targets seems good. I do wonder how it will work though. Say you have 5 targets that are stacked and you Shadow Word Pain one of them twice. Will all 5 have the debuff, or will it just be 3 and if you hit anything else, you got lucky? I do need to see this rune in action to really understand how it works, but at face value for multi-target content or for dungeons, it seems quite powerful, and very mana efficient too. The final leg rune we have is Power Word Barrier. This is taken from Cataclysm, and over the years has been a super impactful tool for priests to mitigate damage. But in vanilla, it has one big difference. It is party-wide only, and I'm assuming it will always affect the priest who casts it, and 4 other players. I can already see people needing to move the priest to barrier the tank party on raid frames, and then moving them back to a party where there's more mana regen going on. TBC group-wide buffs, how I do not miss you. All the same, it's 25% less damage and no spell knockbacks for 10 seconds. Even if it is only on 5 players, that's still very strong in PvE and PvP. Also, don't forget these runes can be applied to any specialization. Everyone's going to think barrier is a healer thing, but if you're a Shadow Priest, you can still pick this up if you want. Finally, we have the glove runes, starting with Shadow Word Death, and this is the Burning Crusade version, which means it's not strictly an execute and can be cast on enemies however much health they have. It also reflects full damage back to the priest. Imagine a fully well buffed priest one-shotting themselves. Pro tip, don't press this button on Thaddeus when we get to Nax. But Shadow Word Death is a very high skill cap ability in PvP, where you can predict incoming CC effects and use the ability to break them, and in PvE it's just another damage tool really. Next is another Burning Crusade spell, Circle of Healing. It's essentially Prayer of Healing, but it's instant cast, and it's party-wide. If I remember from TBC, you could empty your mana bar incredibly fast pressing this button a few times, as it didn't have a cooldown. This one's going to be very encounter dependent. You need entire parties getting hit by consistent damage for this to be worth choosing, and at the moment there's only a couple fights that fit that description in Classic, but time will tell as for what the updated raiding content will provide. Next we have Penance, and Penance is a really powerful spell introduced in Wrath of the Lich King. It can target either allies to heal them or enemies to deal damage. It's very efficient at performing both roles and is just a good button to be pressing off of cooldown. In vanilla though, spell healing and spell damage are 2 different stats, so you're not really going to be getting full value out of Penance all of the time. Still, I think as a PvPer or just a healing focused priest in general, this will probably be the rune you're taking on your gloves. Last but not least is another great AoE tool for Shadow in Mindseer. This is the Wrath version, meaning you have to have an enemy present to use it, and you can't channel it on allies as you could in Kata. Still, it will give the priest a real button to press when there are many enemies in front of them, and combined with Shared Pain, Shadow Priest is going to go from a bit of a 0 to a hero on AoE. Also, with all these various updates to Shadow's damage dealing, can I just say when you fully talent out Vampiric Embrace, that it causes 30% of your damage dealt to heal your party. So yeah, the priest party should be looking pretty healthy. So then we'll finish up on thoughts on the priest so far. First up, if you are a PvP enjoyer, it's kind of hard to believe just how much stronger this class has got. Between Strength of Soul, Power Word Barrier, and Penance or Shadow Word Death, The priest is really spoilt for choice now. For PvE healing, there are definitely a few new toys that have been added, but ultimately they just give the priest a few more niche options on how to heal. They could already kind of do everything, and now they can just do everything but a little bit better. Shadow has certainly received some tools which will make them more relevant on the DPS meters, especially on AoE. I think Shadow Priest is going to be one of the better classes in the game when it comes to sustained cleave or AoE. There hasn't really been much in the way of helping out their whole mana bar situation though, and this was really a key concern I had from vanilla. Of course, we don't know the full story yet as to what all the runes will be, but if you are a Shadow Priest enjoyer, you should still want to see some improvements on the mana front. Warlock in vanilla was my main for the re-release of the game back in 2019. So I'll admit, maybe I'm more than just a bit excited to see what Blizzard has planned for this class in Season of Discovery. All aspects of Warlock gameplay have been given way more options, and the class will hopefully see more widespread viability throughout this season. That being whether you prefer a damage over time heavy affliction playstyle, blasting your targets directly with destruction spells, or leaning more into the tanking class fantasy that the Warlock has had here and there. So let's make a start on the chest runes and see what's new. First of all, we have a totally new addition to the game, Lake of Fire. It causes Rain of Fire to leave a zone on the floor that will increase all fire damage you and your demon deal by 40% for 15 seconds. Okay, we're getting straight to the point here. Blizzard want Destruction to care about dealing fire damage rather than just sitting there and pressing Shadow Bolt. Now, fire destruction has always had its place during these early versions of WoW, but it struggled to find itself being more effective than Shadow. You may remember in the Burning Crusade when Warlock got Incinerate as a filler spell, we'll be talking more about Incinerate in a moment, that Warlock still back then went Shadow more often than not because of Seed of Corruption. And no, there is no Seed of Corruption in Season of Discovery. Or is there? We'll talk about that soon too. So whether you're choosing this rune to improve your Hellfire on AoE, or just casting a rank 1 on single target for the debuff, this is going to put a much bigger punch into your fire spells. Even just tab targeting Immolate with this debuff up would add quite a bit of damage. Next we have Master Channeler. Your drain life is no longer channeled and instead appears to be a damage over time effect that lasts 15 seconds with a 15-second cooldown. Its mana cost is increased by 100% and heals for 50% more each time it deals damage. I think this ability is more geared towards PvP and of course Warlock tanking. So just as a reference, the highest rank of drain life we can get by level 25 is rank 2, which we learn at level 22. This does 17 damage a tick. Let's say we have some extra spell power from new items in the game, and that drain life is doing 20 damage per tick instead. Over a 15-second duration, assuming it's ticking once per second with Master Channeler, that's 300 damage dealt and 450 healing. That is not half bad. And the early ranks of drain life are known for being quite weak as well. With the highest rank of drain life, Master Channeler will have a base damage of just over 1,000 and it will do 1,500 healing, and that's pure base damage with 0 spell power. This rune is going to be crazy at higher levels. Next we have Siphon Soul. It increases the amount drained by drain life and drain soul by 6% for each of these shadow effects afflicting the target, up to a maximum of 18% bonus damage. I think the wording of shadow effects will mean any shadow debuff that's active, though it means you could apply a utility curse such as Curse of Shadows, and that's still going to contribute. Probably, that's how it reads to me. Either way, it does seem that Blizzard are trying to push a damage over time version of the Warlock in vanilla, and you know what, I'm just gonna say it, it needs more help than they're currently getting. The reason why is damage over time effects in vanilla do not crit, and they don't scale with haste, and there are barely any haste modifiers anyway, and there are also very few temporary sources of spell power to boost the power of your dots with. Also, things don't tend to live for very long in vanilla either, and Drain Soul doesn't execute. Apart from that, they'll be fine. It will be good for leveling and the Drain Tank playstyle, it certainly has that going for it. Again, this is the start of the season, it's very early on, maybe more pieces of the puzzle will appear at levels 40, 50 and 60. Finally for the chest is Demonic Tactics. This is a bit of a flexible pick, which could fit well enough into any specialization. The best use for this is probably some kind of Shadow Mastery Ruin Destruction build, but that will be possible at level 60 of course and not 25. And with another rune we'll see later, I think the more or less one-button Shadow Bolt spec will still be a thing, you know. So those are all the chest runes, onto the legs. The next part of the Affliction lock is here with Everlasting Affliction, and it's going to be a similar story to what I said about Siphon Soul, because what this does is causes a bunch of your spells to refresh the duration of corruption. Now this effect is amazing in Wrath of the Lich King, because of snapshotting. Snapshotting is using a spell when you have loads of bonus effects running, such as spell power, crit chance, and flat damage increases. And then you can keep that huge buffed up damage over time effect over the course of the whole fight, and it adds a lot to your damage. These bonuses either don't exist in vanilla or are currently very rare. This rune might as well read saves you one global cooldown every 18 seconds. But again, I could be wrong, they could be adding things to fix this later, we will see. Next we have a modified version of Incinerate. Whereas the version we'll be used to is a casted fire spell that deals bonus damage to targets afflicted by Immolate, this new version instead increases all fire damage dealt by 25% for 15 seconds. And when you add on top the 40% you're already getting from Lake of Fire, that is a lot of extra damage for your fire warlocks. These spells are also going to affect all of your fire spells, so your Hellfire is going to be doing some big numbers. In fact, Hellfire might be dealing so much damage to the warlock that it's not really practical to use. Other than that, your Soulfire crits are going to be huge with all these buffs running, and I have to imagine that Incinerate is still the filler spell for fire destruction, since Searing Pain generates bonus threat, and unless tanking threat is way improved, it's just going to be too much. And there is one more big fire spell to talk about, but that's on the glove runes a little bit later. Next we have Demonic Grace, which acts as a cooldown aimed primarily at tanking warlocks. Demonic Grace increases you and your demon's chance to dodge by 30%, as well as increasing the chance to critically strike by 30%, for 6 seconds. A good mix of offense and defense is on offer here. This is going to be great at the start of a fight when you need to establish threat. Having a much higher chance to crit should help out a lot. This could be okay for other builds as well. 30% crit is a big number. I do wonder though whether this will be on the global cooldown. If it is, you're only going to be able to get 3 spells out of it. If it's not, you can get 4. Pretty big difference, time will tell. The final leg rune we have is Demonic Pact, a talent from Wrath of the Lich King which I am all too familiar with because I main a demo log. This one does work a bit differently though. First of all, it's party-wide instead of raid-wide. Oh boy, party-wide, highly impactful buffs. I did not miss this from TBC if I'm honest. Also, it always grants a bare minimum amount of spell power because in vanilla, when you're leveling, quite often, you just don't have any spell power because Blizzard were too busy putting strength and agility on cloth gear. So yeah. In raiding environments though, this rune is going to be very powerful and will buff casters or healers in your party by 10% of the warlock's total spell power. So roll a warlock today and get priority for caster upgrades, in other words. I don't know how I feel about this one. It's such a huge party-wide buff, it may become a bit too mandatory. At least in PvE, that is. Finally, we have the glove runes, a lot of ones to be excited about here. First up is Haunt. This is the final part of the Affliction Warlock package. I don't think 20% more dot damage on top of the other runes is enough to make it work. This will be incredible for leveling though. Straight up, warlocks don't need food or water anymore, ever. Maybe we'll see some more support for the Affliction playstyle at endgame or raiding later on, but at level 25, I don't think that's what you're going to be playing. Next is an ability which I'm probably way too excited about, Shadow Bolt Volley. How many bosses and NPCs over the years in vanilla have we seen use some kind of volley ability? And now for the first time ever, we can send a volley right back at them. Shadow Bolt Volley makes your Shadow Bolt strike up to 5 targets within a chain distance of 10 yards of your target, but for 20 reduced damage. Is that supposed to be 20% or are we just talking a flat 20? Even if we assume it's 20% less damage, this is one of the most powerful runes in the game. This ability has a cooldown or something, right? There's no way your Shadow Bolt just hits 5 targets. I couldn't find footage of somebody actually trying this at BlizzCon, so we'll have to wait and see. But remember, in vanilla, when Shadow Bolt crits, it makes targets take 20% more shadow damage for the next 4 direct hits, and you can get 100% bonus crit damage from Rune, and 10% more crit chance from Demonic Tactics. No class in the game will be able to compare with the damage this does on 3 to 5 targets. This rune is just better Seed of Corruption. I'm actually going to go as far as saying that. Can't wait to try this one out in dungeons. I don't think people are going to like tanking it though. Moving on, we have the spell that Fire Warlocks will be looking forwards to, Chaos Bolt. This is similar to the Wrath of the Lich King version, where it's a casted high damage single target fire spell. This early version of Chaos Bolt does not guarantee crit, and instead cannot be resisted, which in vanilla is pretty good actually, as well as causing all fire spells to pierce absorption effects, which is more of a PvP thing but very strong at the same time. And with 40% fire damage from Lake of Fire, 25% from Incinerate, and then later by level 60 you can spec into Demonic Sacrifice for 15% more fire damage, and 10% more from Ember Storm in the Destruction Tree, and yeah. I think this ability is gonna hit pretty hard. I mean, there is this small problem with fire damage specs called Molten Core and Blackwing Lure and fire immune bosses. We'll deal with that when we get there, I guess. Last but not least, it's the rune engraving that's going to turn your warlocks into tanks, Metamorphosis. Warlocks now and again have had this tanking role in WoW. We tanked Twin Emperors in vanilla, on the Demon during Leotheris the Blind in TBC, and most recently they can be used on the Blood Prince's fight in ICC. And though they've always had this tanking fantasy, they've always tanked casters using their high health pools and life regeneration tools, so for warlocks to really become a tank, they're going to need to get in the fight and be able to take melee hits. So the first part of the meta rune will cover that. Locks will gain 500% more armor and reduce the chance to be crit by 6%. On top of that, they'll generate 100% more threat and gain extra mana from life tap. Searing Pain will be your main single target threat generator and will also be instant. For multiple enemies, you have Shadow Cleave, which replaces Shadow Bolt, and your Curse of Recklessness will now be your taunt. You also get Demon Charge, which is very similar to a Warrior Charge, and a Demonic Howl, which is an AoE taunt. It seems like a solid toolkit for this class to really start tanking content, and I expect to see plenty of meta locks tanking at 25. Again, bit of a concern about Molten Core, Blackwing Lure and Searing Pain since it can't hit a bunch of bosses. Maybe warlocks just don't main tank these fights, but it's quite far off into the future, so we'll see when we get there. And that is everything for warlocks, so overall thoughts at this early stage. I think there will still be a spec which is basically just pressing Shadow Bolt, but it will focus mainly on dungeon or AoE content. If Shadow Bolt Volley just straight up makes Shadow Bolt hit 5 targets with a small damage penalty, this ability will be turbo broken. I'm kind of hoping it works like that so I can try it, but we'll see soon enough, won't we? Fire Destruction looks very promising. Once we're at level cap, you will have near enough 100% bonus fire damage. If that doesn't make it somewhat viable, I don't know what will. Demonic Pact is a concern, I'm not gonna lie. Those super rigid raid groups we had in TBC were not my favorite thing, to be honest. I was happy to move away from that in Wrath. Affliction, for me, I just don't think it's gonna be a thing quite yet. Sorry if you enjoy dots, but dots suck in vanilla. They scale very poorly, meanwhile single target casted spells can crit and gain a ton of extra damage. And the Metamorphosis tank has a solid toolkit that I think is also quite well thought out for this early stage. The Druid in vanilla World of Warcraft is the class that has the ability to do it all. Do you want a healer? They can heal. Do you need a tank? Well, they can do that too. And if you are in need of a DPS, Feral with enough effort can be quite good, and Moonkin's a thing, I guess. Whilst Druid had this diverse class fantasy as the shapeshifter shifting to meet their party's needs, it often turned out in reality that they struggled to be good enough at one thing to really see a lot of play. This became very noticeable during the re-release of Classic in 2019, where unfortunately for our nature-loving druids, it was not uncommon to see 1 or 2 of them in a 40-player raiding group. On top of that, they were almost surely healing, as that was seen as their most viable role. Oh, and you couldn't use heal over time effects either because there was a buff cap, and with players stacking world buffs and consumables, a rejuvenation could push a world buff off of somebody's buff list, which would more often than not lead to a very unhappy warrior. And heal over time effects of the same rank don't stack anyway, so yeah. You existed, buffed Mark of the Wild on the raid, cast Healing Touch and pressed Fairy Fire, so your raid's 24 warriors could delete the enemy 0.1 seconds faster. Though in Season of Discovery, I'm very much hoping that druids get some help, and that we can see this class represented a lot more. Druids currently have 12 known runes across 3 slots. those being their chest, legs, and gloves. Each rune does lean somewhat towards a niche playstyle for the Druid, but these choices are not locked behind any specialization choice. You can mix and match them as you please. Let's make a start on the runes that can be applied to your chest. First up, Fury of Storm Rage. Your wrath is free and has a chance to make your next healing touch instant. Well, Moonkins, there you go. Can't have mana problems if you don't have mana costs, can you? This talent was actually from Cataclysm and is found in the Restoration tree during that expansion. In Cata, when healers have downtime, there is more of an expectation to start DPSing, and many healer trees feature something akin to this. So it's an interesting solution to Moonkin's mana bar problems in vanilla. You also have the option to pop out of Moonkin form, do an instant healing touch, and then go back into form. That's only going to use about a third of your mana on a good day, right? Those Druid spells are still expensive. Also remember, Wrath is nature damage, and if you play Boomy in vanilla, or played with one, you'll know they only ever cast Starfire, which dealt arcane damage. There were two reasons for that. One was just the mana efficiency side of things. They could keep casting for longer, which is obviously not a problem anymore. And the second reason was neither Curse of Elements or Shadows from Warlocks reduces enemies' nature resistance or increases nature damage taken. Kind of ironic, Curse of Elements doesn't consider nature an element, but there you go, vanilla. Could new curses be added at some point that reduces nature and holy resistances or damage taken? After all, those two spell schools were bundled together in TBC 4 flasks. And I was going to say Resto Druids might want to consider this spell, but remember that spell power and healing power are different stats in vanilla, so Restoration would not be contributing much damage. And it's probably just downranking spells if they wanted to be efficient. Either way, Wrath should become your main filler spell, and you can use your mana bar on other things now as a boonkin. Next, Wild Strikes. Oh boy, so what this says is basically, well, in Cat Bear or Dire Bear form, players within 20 yards in your party get Wind Fury. So, Alliance just got Wind Fury, in other words. Feral Stonks just went through the roof. Feral will now be required for every melee group in PvE. Or will it just be Ferals picking up this rune? Will Resto Druids be expected to take this rune and hop into cat form and do a slash dance when there isn't much healing to do? Or do you just only ever bring Feral Druids now to raiding content? Also, while this is strong, the way Horde applies Wind Fury is notably different, and maybe advantageous. They can just have any Shaman slam down a Wind Fury totem, and that's it, your Wind Fury's up for a period of time. This new version forces somebody to use a rune, which are all very powerful, and to be in a shapeshift form. Then again, from what I can tell, Wild Strikes is an aura-type standard buff, not a weapon buff, meaning you can put on sharpening stones and ferals themselves will benefit from Wind Fury. So maybe both factions want ferals now. I mean, hypothetically, if this was a weapon buff like Wind Fury is, you'd expect it to also be a periodic effect, which means your druids would be power shifting for Wild Strikes. And I don't know how I feel about that. This is definitely one of the more powerful runes from a utility point of view we will see in this season. I just hope it doesn't warp the whole druid class, especially on Alliance, around this one rune. The next one, Survival of the Fittest, is pretty simple. It might as well read, hey, if you're a bear druid, you can now tank raid bosses. You also get a 20% flat damage reduction in bear, which is a huge amount. And as we will see later, druids are getting bonuses to their threat generation too. They also become crit immune in PvE, smoothing out damage intake by a lot. This was not possible in vanilla, and was one of the big issues that bear tanks faced. So get used to seeing a lot more than just warrior tanks in Season of Discovery, because this is just one of many improved tanking specs. Finally, for the chest runes, we have Living Seed, which is of course tailored towards Restoration Druids. You know, at first I was a bit skeptical about this, and I think it could be okay. It's just going to be very mana intensive. We'll see with the other Resto Druid focused runes that you're going to be getting some powerful heal over times, but this one wants you to care more about your casted spells. I'm assuming still no heal over time effects can crit, or this would be crazy overpowered, since it applies from any heal in the version that we are shown here. However, Druids can spec into 50% plus crit chance on regrowth through talents, and the tier 2 5 set reduces the cast time of regrowth by 0.2 seconds. In fact, back in 2019 Classic, this tier set made regrowth healing a thing. I realise we're going to be level 25 on launch and we're a bit far off getting tier 2, but it was just a thought. Outside of the regrowth build, you aren't critting anywhere near enough without world buffs to make this seem useful to me, and assuming heal over time still cannot crit, as they could not in vanilla, this just seems okay. Next we have the runes for the leg slot. First up we have Savage Roar, the combo point spender from Wrath that makes your Feral Druid really start to do damage. You spend combo points to do 30% more physical damage, and its duration scales with how many points you spend. For Classic though, you might as well put an asterisk beneath this ability, which says requires power shifting, because energy regeneration in Classic is static. It doesn't scale with haste effects, you don't have Berserk, and Tiger's Fury doesn't give you energy. You just don't have extra resources available. I feel like Savage Roar is the first part of the puzzle for Ferals, and a future rune will improve their energy regen, or just make more of it available. I mean, it's still probably going to be better than your other finishing moves, but it feels kind of clunky with where it is at the moment. Next up is a Life Bloom. This is the Wrath of the Lich King version, which, again, seems rather mana intensive for vanilla. It's an instant cast which can stack up to 3 times on a single target, and half the mana is refunded when the spell ends. It also reduces the global cooldown on rejuvenation and a Life Bloom too. This is a solid heal over time. Front-loaded mana cost though. I wonder if the last tick can crit in vanilla. I'm guessing it would still count as a periodic effect, so the answer would be no, but if it did, that would be great for Living Seed. I hope Druids get more of a chance to heal over time. It's just healing in Classic is very fast and reactive. You see a health bar dip and it's kind of like a race to see who can top it up first. On top of that, there's only really a handful of fights where the raid is taking consistent damage. So maybe this is one you mainly keep rolling on the tanks and the Warlocks when they're life tapping. Next is Skull Bash. Presumably this will be available in both bear and cat form. This is a mix of a gap closer and an interrupt that should be a powerful tool for druids of all specs in all areas of content. For the rune slot that it's in, it is more oriented towards bear, where it's like a second mini feral charge with a brief interrupt attached to it. This ability was introduced in Cataclysm, where originally it interrupted for 5 seconds, before later being nerfed down to a 4-second lockout. So we are getting a more toned down version of it than that. Seems pretty good really, not much to add here. And for balance, you're getting one of the big iconic abilities that this specialization has, Star Surge. This is a big hard-hitting spell with a short cooldown for Boomy, at least I'm presuming that's what it'll be. Notably here it does arcane damage, not Spellstorm as it does in Kata. Spellstorm just being arcane and nature together. Good for curse synergy, as we've already talked about though. It says it benefits from talents too, so this should include extra base damage, crit chance, spell cast time reduction, and crit damage. So if this thing hits you and crits, you should expect a good amount of your health bar to just evaporate. Definitely makes Boomy far more the PvP threat, and it's just a fun extra button to press in PvE. Finally, we have the Glove Runes. Feral Druids will be getting Mangle, and this is a bit of a mix and match as to which version of Mangle it is. First up, it specifies that it will benefit from effects that trigger Claw or Maul, so I'm assuming this is Mangle for both Bear and Cat here. The 1 minute duration on bleed effects and bonuses to Shred was a Wrath of the Lich King change too, which was brought up from 12 seconds in TBC. But the normal damage modifier of 160% here was from TBC Mangle Cat. Mangle Bear in TBC had a damage modifier of 115%. Then again, Mangle has for a long time technically been 2 abilities balanced differently for Bear and Cat, though I'm not entirely sure what we are getting here. This does however fit the Feral DPS rune in the glove slot, the best out of all the abilities that are shown on this row. So maybe it is purely intended for them this time around. I guess we'll know for sure on launch. But Restoration is a spell added in Wrath of the Lich King, Wild Growth. Instant heal over time that applies to several players, except it's been vanilla-ified. In Wrath it's party or raid members, in Classic, very similar to TBC Circle of Healing. It's party only. You know, it took Blizzard nearly all of Wrath of the Lich King to change Wild Growth to where it prioritizes players over pets and guardians. Surely that won't happen again, right? All in all, seems like a good heal on melees, as you know they're going to be stacked, but it may be harder to use on more spread out ranged groups. Can I just say here, resto druids don't get Omen of Clarity passively in Classic, and even if you did spec into it, it doesn't proc from spellcasts. These new heals seem good and everything, but I just don't know where the mana is coming from. Unless you do spec into Omen of Clarity, find the fastest melee weapon you can, and melee to fish for procs in between spellcasts. This could actually be a thing, you know, I guess time will tell. As a flex pick, we have Sunfire. Now this is quite different from the spell you may know from later expansions. In Season of Discovery, it will be an extra damage over time effect that causes nature damage. It's not an AoE version of Moonfire. Also, Sunfire can be cast in bear form and in cat form too, where it will also grant a combo point, and it'll probably cost 45 energy or so. In the later expansions, Legion I think it was, Blizzard added Moonfire as castable in forms for druids, so it's kind of similar to that. This will probably be taken by boomies for the most part, even though damage over time effects tend not to be that great in Classic as they don't crit or benefit from haste. Boomkins will now have mana to spare. It could possibly have use in cat if the energy cost is very low, but that would mean not having Mangle, so I doubt it. Now I'm starting to think that Mangle may be cat only, you know, because after having read this version of Lacerate that we're getting, it might as well be. Lacerate applies a bleed that stacks up to 5 times and causes a high amount of threat. Okay, I'm pretty sure that in all group content you're going to have a feral because they can do Wind Fury, so that's got your bleed damage covered. But there is something even more interesting about this version of Lacerate. The bonus damage it deals is weapon damage. So this is the first time ever a feral spec druid has actually had to care about their weapon in vanilla. The whole manual crowd pummeler farming meta existed purely because feral had no weapon damage scaling. Well, Burge, you're now off the hook and can proudly rock that Warden staff as Biss. Assuming the Warlock tanks don't take it, of course. Spoilers. Cat druids though, back to Noma with you, at least for the time being. To be honest, I am thinking way ahead here though. We're going to be level 25 in Season of Discovery, for a good amount of time. Maybe the level 40 runes will change this whole format up once again, but that's the fun of the seasonal really, isn't it? So then, a few closing thoughts on each spec as they currently are. The most improved for me at this early stage has to be Moonkin. With a free damage dealing spell to cast, Star Surge and another damage over time effect, the laser chicken is really starting to cook. It's a shame that Curse of Shadows or Elements doesn't affect nature spells. I think this is a bit of an oversight in vanilla, but there is room to fix it this season. Next is the Bear Tank. Survival of the Fittest and Lacerate are both huge additions to get. However, there are no misdirection effects in Season of Discovery, yet at least, though bears will need a moment to ramp up their threat. But I think once you have your Lacerate stacks going, mobs are going to stick to you like a warrior with Thunder Fury. Their AoE threat is still practically non-existent though, but for a main tank, berries are looking very solid. Next is Feral Cat. The fact that Alliance are getting Wind Fury is a big deal. The way it's applied may also make it of interest for Horde when it comes to min-maxing later on in the game too. Mangle is a good filler and a general damage tool, and as good as Savage Roar is, I think you need more things to generate combo points before that will really start scaling. Maybe I'm wrong on that one though. Then Restoration. Honestly, the healing additions seem good, they do. I've just no idea where you're going to get the mana needed to cast these spells. But you could very well be forced to essentially waste 11 talent points to get Omen of Clarity, and then have to stand in melee range attacking to make it work. But those are my current thoughts on the Druid and the runes that we have available. A good start, I would say. We all know Druids need some help. Rogues in vanilla World of Warcraft have always been an amazing performer in all areas of content. They were in the top 3 DPS classes in the game, oftentimes being able to be number 1 if a fight had enough potential to cleave, and in PvP only the Mage comes close to having such a legacy of famous names known for dominating on this class. So in Season of Discovery, it will be interesting to see how Blizzard build on the reputation that the vanilla rogue has, both from a damage point of view and from a more new tanking one as well. I have to say some of the class fantasies being brought into the game in Season of Discovery are ones which I have heard about over the years, but I can't really say I've heard people saying, but what if Rogue could tank? Nevertheless, that is what Blizzard have decided to do, and we don't have long to wait until we find out how it performs. But today let's talk about the known runes for Rogue in Season of Discovery, go over how they will work, and to what extent they will impact this class. I want to start by covering the tank package as we have it at the moment, as I don't see a world where you're playing rogue tank and you don't pick all three of the runes which they have. The first one that makes sense to cover is your leg rune here, Blade Dance, a new finishing move that lasts longer and increases chance to parry based upon combo points spent. At 5 combo points it's 30 seconds of 10% bonus parry. Notably, 1 combo point is still 14 seconds of 6% parry, and they have given a large bonus from just 1 combo point for a very good reason, which we will talk about when you've seen all the tanking runes. Either way, you will absolutely want this up 100% of the time during combat, because of your next rune, Just a Flesh Wound. This is the big important tanking rune which gives you tons of bonuses. First of all, you take 20% less physical damage whilst the Blade Dance is active. Rogues still wear leather, and as far as we know so far, there are no damage mitigation offhands, no bonus armor scaling, or even bucklers as they had during the vanilla beta. You're still just going to be dual wielding as normal, so incoming damage will be high when hits get through. Additionally, whilst this rune is active, you have a 6% less chance to be crit by melee attacks, and threat from all your attacks is massively increased. And finally, your feint ability becomes Tease, which will act as your taunt. So then you'll be crit immune in PvE, take way less physical damage, and you get a taunt from this ability. It's kind of funny that when Prop Pala is finally getting taunt in vanilla, so are rogues and other classes, but anyway. Finally, on your gloves is Man Gauche, so you instantly strike with your offhand for regular damage, increasing your chance to parry for 10 seconds, and gaining 1 combo point. An efficient mix of combo point generation and defensives here. This should be an ability to press off of cooldown for sure. So that's the rogue tanking package. Here are a few thoughts on it at this early stage. So if I'm being honest, this just sounds really clunky to play. You'll have to run in and pull with no cooldowns active quite often, where your first 2 globals are spent frantically trying to get Blade Dance active as soon as possible for the parry chance and the flat physical damage reduction from Just a Flesh Wound. During these globals, you're pretty much just a rogue running into a pack of enemies, praying that your passive avoidance kicks in and you don't get deleted. But if you do start to get hit, well, the healer has to do something about that. They can't just ignore you, and there will be at least 3 DPS in the party, and other people will start generating threat. And the rogue at the moment has 0 AoE threat whatsoever. Even grenades are casted in vanilla, and you can't dodge block or parry during casts, so what you're going to have to start doing is tabbing between targets and hitting them to build threat. And you know what happens when you tab as a rogue in vanilla? You lose your combo points. So with how it plays at the moment, you'll have to run in and nade at the same time, Man Gauche, Blade Dance, then tab and Sinister Strike, Slice and Dice, tab, Riposte is probably up by now, so you'll use that, tab again, Sinister Strike, and you'll have 1 combo point to do something before you feel as though you need to tab again, and you'll just carry on from there. There are tanks in vanilla with weaker AoE threat for sure, but to have weaker AoE threat and a weakness to target switching seems like a pretty big flaw at the moment. Then again, maybe Blizzard just put a 200% threat modifier on everything the rogue does. Engineering is starting to sound mandatory on this class for me. I mean, you are probably taking it anyways, but now it's even better. And of course, later in Season of Discovery, when rogues can get Blade Flurry and Adrenaline Rush, they're going to see some big improvements. I also think this spec will be amazing on single target threat. Passive mitigation from the rogue was already really good, and their 2 new abilities will grant 20% more parry when active. And between Wind Fury, Parry Haste and Sword spec, Tank Rogue is going to absolutely demolish their main target. They also have a strong build by level 25 too. In this simple build, I picked up 5% more parry, riposte, and 5% hit. Stacking those up at level 25 is going to make for some interesting rogue tank gameplay. I just hope that they can withstand taking a hit or 2 on the pull without everything falling apart. And yes, it's early in the season, but an AoE ability does feel like it's missing at the moment. Fan of Knives would be the obvious answer. Maybe with a 6 to 10 second cooldown, does minor damage, generates 1 combo point. Maybe that's already planned for a later rune, we don't know. Either way, that's the rogue tank, has potential, looks kind of clunky to play though. Let's move on and cover the next set of runes, which again I think are really a package deal. And if you want to play them, you're probably going to be playing all three. And this package will be for people who want to play around poisons as a key source of damage. It's kind of like Blizzard are having a second go at making TBC Assassination somewhat playable. And I may have a thing or two to say about that as well, but we'll cover the runes first. Deadly Brew. When you inflict any other poison on a target, you also inflict deadly poison. Okay, so this frees you up from actually needing to use deadly on your weapons, which is nice because you don't even learn this ability till level 30, and seeing as we're 25 at the start of Season of Discovery, that would have been a bit of a problem. But this modified version of the talent with the same name from Wrath of the Lich King is the first piece of the assassination puzzle in Season of Discovery. And the next piece is Envenom, another TBC ability. But this one is mixed with the Wrath of the Lich King version too. The first notable change is that Envenom does not consume poisons. It did in TBC, and in Wrath of the Lich King you can have a talent or glyph the ability to stop this from happening, so for this effect to be baseline is really strong. Following an Envenom, you have a 75% increased chance of applying instant poison for 1 second, and an additional 1 second per combo point spent. And finally is perhaps Assassination's most notorious ability, Mutilate. Instantly attack with both weapons, dealing bonus damage to poison targets, awards 2 combo points. So I've quite a few things to say about this. First up, it does not specify on this tooltip whether you are required to dual wield daggers. The TBC and Wrath of the Lich King versions both do. Then again, assuming Mutilate is 60 energy, dealing an instant 100% weapon damage with both weapons, that would be pretty OP if you could use whatever you wanted with this. Second is that when you mutilate and crit twice, you get 2 bonus combo points from the Seal Fate talent. Well, at least that's how it's worked in other expansions in the past. So this could be 4 combo points from one ability in Classic, which is really powerful. Finally, there is no positional requirement either, which there was up to Wrath of the Lich King. So all in all, Mutilate looks good, and it could very well be played by more than just rogues going down the assassination tree. So here's a few thoughts on the assassination package rogues are getting. It has problems, like a lot of problems actually. So where should I start? Maybe with this. What do poisons scale with in Classic? Great question. They don't. Spell power doesn't affect them. That was an alternative server thing, and they only began to scale with attack power in Wrath of the Lich King. If the target has debuffs that cause them to take more damage, then your poison damage will be increased. Otherwise, they won't. This is why during Classic, if you were PvEing on a rogue, you tended to use Sharpening Stones or Wind Fury. The second problem is you can't have Wind Fury and poisons active at the same time. They are both considered weapon buffs and don't stack. I mean, Horde won't get Wind Fury to level 30 anyway, that's true, but a rogue running this spec will need a Feral Wind Fury, which I believe is considered an aura-wide buff, not a temporary weapon enchant. The third problem is many poisons in Classic have charges. At level 25 we will have Instant Poison rank 1, which has 40 charges. And if you envenom and get that 75% extra chance to apply instant poison, on top of a few Wind Fury procs, you're literally going to run out of charges and have to start reapplying poisons every couple of minutes. Even the highest rank of instant poison only has 115 charges. And there are only a handful of poisons which don't have charges, such as crippling poison, but then you aren't getting one of the big benefits from envenom as you don't have instant poison active. So in short, for this assassination build, poisons in vanilla just aren't very good, and also you probably want to raise the poison charges or something by a fair amount, otherwise the rogue is going to pause mid-combat and say, sorry guys, instant poison ran out, let me reapply it real quick. And now on to the rest of the runes which don't quite fit together into packages and could see a bit more experimentation. First is a chest rune, Slaughter from the Shadows. Reduces the cost of backstab and ambush by 20, so that will mean you're getting a 40 energy backstab then. I mean, just go into Season of Discovery, play your standard dagger rogue, but your main ability to deal damage just got its energy cost reduced by 1/3. I have to imagine that's already pretty good. I'm not sure it's quite keeping pace with some of the runes other DPS classes have received, but pressing backstab and seeing those big crits is satisfying. Not a huge amount to say here, just makes an already viable spec a bit better. Next is Quick Draw. Fire a shot using your ranged weapon, causing normal damage and reducing the target's movement speed by 50% for 6 seconds, also generates 1 combo point. And now rogues have an actual reason to want a ranged weapon upgrade over just bonus stats. I guess you can pay back hunters for all the times they took your melee weapons now. This isn't a full-on ranged rogue spec either, by the way. You aren't going to be auto-attacking with your ranged weapon in between this. It's just a ranged combo point generator and a slow. Which has me to assume the key role of this ability will be PvP. I can see a rogue getting a ranged slow being reasonable. At the same time, it's going to conflict with going for a reset on stealth, which is probably just the better option here. Similar to Quick Draw is Between the Eyes, a ranged finisher that deals damage as well as stuns. It also shares a cooldown with Kidney Shot. And at level 25, can I remind you, rogues do not have Cheap Shot or Kidney Shot, so maybe they needed a stun to compete. Again, you have to think this is more relevant on the PvP side of things, where it will allow rogues to close the gap on targets. It seems okay, it's just rogues tend to eventually get so many cooldowns that if you're playing it right, you can already stick to your target. I am no pro rogue PvPer by any means though, so maybe I'm underestimating this. Finally, we have 1 or 2 glove runes to cover. First of which is Shadow Strike, which is kind of a mix between Ambush and Shadow Step, but it does require stealth to use. Due to other runes on the gloves, once again, seems like more of a PvP tool, but would you rather Shadow Strike for damage and 1 combo point, or Cheap Shot to set up your entire rotation moving forwards? Then again, just like I've mentioned, you won't have Cheap Shot at level 25, so maybe this is the build where you're jumping on people and really just trying to global them. Also, who knows, we could get Shadow Dance later on and this becomes a PvE thing as well. Next is Shiv. Again, I think of PvP for this. Despite it benefiting from effects that trigger Sinister Strike, it's an offhand attack, which means it won't proc Wind Fury, so that's no good for PvE. And guaranteeing a poison to be applied is only good for utility poisons, or in other words, just crippling poison. It's kind of like Hamstring for rogues, but it does a bit more damage. And finally, Saber Slash. A new addition to the game, instantly attacking the target and applying a bleed that stacks up to 3 times. You might as well just read this as better Sinister Strike, to be honest, because that's what it is. It deals 30% extra weapon damage and has a bleed on top of it. So if you're playing combat swords, unless there is some funky stuff going on with Mutilate this season, this seems like a no-brainer to pick up. And those are the runes for the rogue. So all in all, I bet tank is going to blast on single target, but at the moment feels clunky due to no built-in AoE threat and combo points fading on tapped target. The poison build needs a few tweaks to make it a bit more user-friendly. Instant poison was not designed to proc anywhere as near as often as it will be doing in Season of Discovery. I also think the spec just won't scale well and won't be anywhere near as good as combat. Both existing combat swords and daggers builds got a buff, but they're just making something which is already known to work a little bit better. Now Blizzard could just be cautious about overbuffing a strong class, and then I go and remind myself what they gave the Mage, so who knows. And on the PvP side of things, there are a bunch of tools here which will of course be worth taking, but I'm not sure how much they impact or improve what a rogue can already do. Rogues seem to be in a strange spot for their level 25 bracket, where I'm not really seeing much in the way of changes from pretty much over half the runes that they're getting. Of course, this is early in the game, I have to say that. There will be more runes added in the future, and the game's not out yet. Things could still change, and maybe in the time that I release this video, some of them already have. The Hunter in vanilla World of Warcraft has perhaps one of the most notorious reputations in the game. Infamous worldwide for taking every single piece of armor and weaponry that drops, having a pet that happily runs off to pull dungeons on their own, and of course forgetting to turn Growl off. They are portrayed as very noob-friendly, when in reality the amount of pitfalls this class can have can make it quite the noob trap. They also have quite defined strengths and weaknesses. They're known to do quite well early on into gearing, but tend to fall off later. They can decimate any class in a 1v1 when they can kite, but struggle once you close the gap. And Hunters also perhaps have the most unique game mechanics out of every class, between pet handling, the dead zone, in and out of combat traps, ammo. The list goes on. My first ever character in World of Warcraft was a Night Elf Hunter, and I'm sure that back then I lived up to all the expectations, and over the years it's a class that I keep going back to. So all in all, I'm pretty excited to talk about this class today, and to check over the runes the Hunter will receive in Season of Discovery. With all that said, let's make a start on the chest runes. Expose Weakness will make it so ranged crits increase your attack power by 40% of your current agility for 7 seconds. This talent single-handedly made survival a relevant utility pick during TBC, because whenever you crit, everyone gained 25% of your agility as attack power against that target. In Wrath, this talent still exists, but it's been changed to a personal buff. The Season of Discovery version is going with a personal buff too, it seems, and it's a hefty 40% of your agility at that. I guess the bigger number on this makes sense, as in vanilla, we are dealing with far lower numbers as a whole. I don't think this rune will see much play at level 25 though, as we're barely going to have any agility to benefit from. But when we start hitting 50 and especially 60, this is going to be granting a ton of stats. So not the best at the moment, but expect good things from this in the future. Also imagine how well this will scale with world buffs and things like Blessing of Kings. Speaking of Blessing of Kings, this leads me on to the next rune. Now this one was only very recently added after feedback from many players that it seemed as though at the level 25 bracket the Alliance were getting the better end of the deal from the new runes. Well, now Hunters will be getting Aspect of the Lion. This chest rune engraving gives all nearby allies 10% bonus stats and increases the total stats for the Hunter by an additional 10%. So Horde, this is your Blessing of Kings. Also, I'm assuming that Aspect of the Lion and Blessing of Kings will not stack, similar to how the Druid and Shaman Wind Fury won't stack. Next we have Master Marksman, 5% bonus crit and 25% less mana cost on your shots. It's not bad, and mana can be very much of an issue on the Hunter in vanilla. They're still going to use mana, of course, and we don't have Aspect of the Viper in the game either. I think there will be some fights where this can be optimal, and even then you can just chug mana pots on cooldown in vanilla. The cooldown of potions still resets during combat, so I think this seems on the weaker side compared to some of the other options we have. Next we have Cobra Strikes. It makes the Hunter's crits cause your pets next to special attacks to also crit. So yes, there is going to be a Beast Mastery package that has been included on the runes so far. This could be okay, but there is a bigger picture as to whether or not this will be a thing, because I'll be honest, with how the game is at the moment, Beast Mastery just won't see play outside of leveling. The simple reason is Hunter pets do not scale with the Hunter's gear, so they're okay early game, but as the Hunter gets more powerful, your pet doesn't. Now, I don't really want to get too much into the data mine stuff in these videos since it is not confirmed, but there was something about pet scaling floating about on patch 1.15, which is the Season of Discovery build. Hunter pets being viable in PvE depend pretty much entirely on whether or not this is real. Originally, Hunter pets began to scale in TBC, and Beast Mastery Hunter was one of the best DPS in the game for the entire game. So if BM ends up being good, the potential is there. There is another issue though, and that's currently vanilla pets do not have avoidance, which is just a passive that makes them take less AoE damage. So even if they scaled, they would really have to be focused by healers on certain encounters. Time will tell, but with the info we currently have, this is kind of just for leveling if you fancy playing it during leveling. Finally, for the chest runes is the best rune we've seen for Hunters so far, Lone Wolf. So let me get this straight, I get to not use a pet and I get 25% more damage with everything. I would have signed up for this at a 10% buff. A 25% aura buff to everything is incredible. Your pet isn't doing anywhere near that much damage, and you don't have to deal with how dumb pets are in vanilla. Basically in PvE, nobody's using a pet again if this rune stays the way it is. It's kind of like Warlock in a way. You use Demonic Sacrifice for nearly the whole of vanilla in TBC, and it's only been in Wrath where you are actually a pet class. I guess Hunters join the club now. On to the next rune, which is Kill Command. Essentially what this does is make your pet's next 3 special attacks do some extra damage. I'd have preferred the TBC version where you can activate this after you crit and your pet does some instant damage, which is a more interesting version in my opinion. This is kind of just macro it into something and forget it exists. It's probably okay for beast mastery, but that's about it. Sniper training. Your shot abilities gain 30% increased crit chance when you have not moved for 6 seconds. Well, I have to say, I love and hate this rune already. So just for some context here, this is a modified talent from Wrath of the Lich King, where in that expansion, a few of your shots gain 15% crit after you have not moved for 6 seconds. But you keep this buff for 15 seconds once it's active, so even if you do need to move a bit, you can keep the buff going quite easily. If this is just 6 seconds of standing still and you move half an inch and lose 30% crit, I don't think that's going to feel very good to play with, but it is 30% crit to all shots. That is a very big number, so maybe it has to be this punishing. Either way, you add this together and Lone Wolf, and hunters are going to be doing a lot of damage early on. Next is Serpent Spread. So, yeah, Serpent Sting, not that great to be honest. You are already multi-shotting on AoE, I suppose, and it is 3 free Serpent Stings, so I guess it's mana efficient, but hunters just really aren't there for AoE. Because aside from this, the damage will be coming from Volley and Explosive Trap, both of which don't scale with attack power in vanilla, so I would just focus more on doing good single targets instead. Next is Flanking Strike. You and your pet deal 100% melee damage. Wait, what? Yeah, melee damage. So the melee hunter is here in vanilla, all the way from Legion. Didn't see that one coming. After you use this ability, Raptor Strike and Mongoose Spike gain bonus damage, with Raptor Strike having a chance to reset the cooldown on Flanking Strike. So, okay, this is interesting. In Legion, I played a bit of Survival Hunter when it got changed to melee, and it did have this damage window focused around stacking Mongoose Bite up, so it seems we're getting something inspired loosely by that. I guess finally hunters can roll on melee weapons and say it's not just a stat stick. Oh, and hunters will want Edge Masters too, I suppose. I'm honestly not sure whether Melee Hunter is still just a giant meme. I kind of think that it is, but this is one we really need to try on the live servers, and it's hard to judge just from reading the runes. I do hope it's somewhat decent though. You know what, total side note here, if this were me doing this whole class rework thing, I'd have tried to make Survival into a Spell Power spec instead. There used to be murmurings about Spell Power Hunter being somewhat possible, but you can make Hunters equip Mail Gear with Spell Power on, have a portion of your shots do arcane damage, and make the spec all about traps, Serpent Sting, and then get a pet such as a Chimera or a Wind Serpent, whose Lightning Breath scales with Spell Power, all of that kind of stuff. I think it would have been cool to see. But anyway, we're getting Melee Hunter, so that's that. I have another thing I want to bring up real quick here. It's more relevant for Melee Hunters, I suppose. It's another one of these data mine things, so not confirmed, but it would be a big change, so I'm going to include it here. And that's the text saying traps can only be placed outside of combat has been removed on the Season of Discovery PTR from all traps. On top of that, traps now have a 40-yard range on the tooltip, so it's possible you can trap in combat, and maybe there's even a trap launcher effect. This is a considerably larger PvP buff than PvE in my opinion, but maybe there are new traps in the future which would heavily benefit from this change. We'll have to wait and see whether this one's real, but it would be a big buff to all aspects of Hunter gameplay. Finally, we have our glove runes. Starting on the creatively named Beast Mastery rune, increases pets damage and health by 30% and focus regen by 80%. Also, Growl is now a 3-second taunt. So I'm going to repeat what I've already said about this. BM needs pets to scale, or this is just going to be for leveling. If hypothetically they did scale though, this should be enough focus regen to really spam Bite and Claw. And a 30% damage buff isn't anything to ignore either. Imagine in the future of the season if pets get scaling and then later on hunters get steady shot or something like that, and we end up with TBC levels of BM Hunter. It could happen, it could not. We'll have to find out on that. Next is Chimera Shot, giving the hunter an ability with different effects depending on the active sting. Serpent Sting will cause bonus damage, Viper Sting restores mana, and Scorpid Sting will disarm for 10 seconds. So, hunters just gotta disarm. That's pretty good in PvP, and may also have niche PvE uses. Other than that, this is a really powerful ability, which will be a big, satisfying button to press each time it comes up. I can see this shot being the absolute go-to for gloves. Because the other choice is Explosive Shot, which is of course the capstone talent of the Wrath of the Lich King Survival Hunter. Unfortunately for vanilla, it seems just to be doing magic damage, which is not what we want on the hunter. We want things that scale with weapon damage, as magic effects, as I've mentioned once or twice, do not scale with attack power in vanilla. It might be decent early game, but it's going to get outscaled so hard by Chimera Shot if the game works the way I expect it to. Also, we don't have a lock and load talent either, which is kind of what makes Explosive Shot fun to use in the first place. Again, imagine if they did my spell damage hunter with this instead, it would be way more interesting. Oh well, maybe later on in the season or something. Finally, we have Carve, which strikes enemies in front of you for 50% weapon damage. It's kind of like a semicircle whirlwind. Still, it's some AoE for the more melee-focused hunter, and it would seem you have this rune or Beast Mastery to choose from in this row. So those are all of our hunter runes, so let's talk about them a bit. With an initial cap of 25, I'm expecting great things from the hunter. This class is known to be so powerful at low levels, and I can see a game where Lone Wolf Sniper training Chimera Shot Hunter is putting them near, if not at the top of DPS meters. This class is going to be a menace on the threat meter, especially when they don't get Feign Death until level 30. The prospect of ranged traps that can be used in combat is a big departure from vanilla design, but it is just data mine details at the moment. And if I'm honest, I don't think this changes much in PvE at the moment. Definitely very strong in PvP though. Hunter's scaling woes appear to have so far largely been unanswered. Pets need to bulk up with their master, or they just won't be used and everyone will take Lone Wolf. Also, they kind of need avoidance. Usually I shy away from just copy-pasting an answer from a later expansion, but in this case, this really just is a good answer to the problem. And in my opinion, it is a bit of a problem. And it's the same story with magical effects having no attack power scaling. You have Serpent Sting, Arcane Shot, Volley, Explosive Trap, and so on. The hunter has a lot of magic damage. Having these things just do base damage for the whole game is part of the hunter's weak scaling issue. This is part of the reason why I mentioned actually doing a full-on spell power hunter as an alternative to just adding scaling too, because if you did give hunters attack power scaling, there will be a whole bunch of other classes asking for the same treatment. And then are we really discovering anything new, or are we just doing what expansions did? I am looking forwards to seeing how far the melee hunter can be pushed though. It should be more of a two-handed build all in all, and I'm really not expecting it to top the meters by any means, but hey, we'll have to wait and see. I think Marksman is overall a big winner here, and that Lone Wolf build I've mentioned once or twice will be really powerful early game. The Horde-exclusive Shaman in vanilla World of Warcraft over the years has experienced many different identities and specializations. One-shotting people as enhancement in battlegrounds with Wind Fury, blasting from the back lines as elemental, supporting allies as a healer with Chain Heal and Wind Fury Totem, and even tanking now and again. This class really has so many directions you could take it in, so believe me when I say Blizzard really had their options open when they wanted to decide what to do with the Shaman in this season. But with plenty to cover and arguably one of the most exciting classes at this early stage, let's check out the known runes for the Shaman in Season of Discovery. So getting straight into it, we already have essentially a new class identity for the Shaman. As we can see, there is a rune planned for dual wield specialization. This will increase chance to hit with weapons while dual wielding, as well as spells by 5%. Also, Storm Strike will now hit with main hand and offhand, when we eventually get it at level 40 that is. Well, if you've watched my videos for a bit, you already know I want to see Blizzard try and make two-hand enhance feel more relevant, instead of just putting dual wield into the game. And judging from the many posts online about this, I think a few other people do as well. I reckon you'll get your two-handed runes eventually, enhancement enjoyers, just not for the 25 bracket. The hopes is that two-handed can compete though, because if you look at classes that can dual wield in vanilla, such as Rogue or Warrior, they tend to be pretty good at this doing DPS thing. Also, I'll assume you'll learn dual wielding at your trainer now, because it's not in the talent tree or on this rune. Either way, that's a lot of hit on both melee and spells for free, so when we finally get Stormstrike at level 40, we should start really seeing the benefits of this. The next chest rune is another step towards a newer class identity for the Shaman. This one is for tanking. So each time you block, you gain maximum mana and gain armor equal to 30% of your shield's value, stacking up to 5 times. So we're talking a 150 bonus armor value from your shield after having blocked 5 times. Also, you gain 10% increased chance to block, and your block value is increased by 15%. The big takeaway here is A, you want a beefy shield with plenty of armor. There are some shields in the game that have extra stat allocation as armor too. Maybe there's even new ones in the BFD raid. And I found this too while I was looking up shields. There is a level 40 elite quest which you can start at 25, Horde only, which awards a shield that you will be able to equip at level 25, but it has stats as if it were level 40. This level 25 phase is going to be so interesting for gearing. Anyway, the second point is you want decent block chance so this stacks up fast and you're consistently getting maximum mana back. Block value is just a flat amount of reduced damage taken when you block, so it tends to be a bit less important. Overall, this is a very good start for the Shaman tank dream. We have some even better runes to come later though. Next we have Overload, and wow, this is a very powerful version of Overload. Usually in Season of Discovery, when we see a talent from later expansions, it's been toned down a bit, but this one is even better. It gives all of Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Chain Heal, Healing Wave, and Lava Burst a 33% chance to cast a similar spell at half effectiveness on the target. Overload for Chain Heal just seems extremely powerful. A 1 in 3 chance to get an extra chain heal straight up might make Resto Shaman one of the best raid healers on the Horde side. Imagine combining this with Nature's Swiftness too. There is a small problem of not getting chain heal until level 40 though, but even early into the season, just a second healing wave cast is already good. The real big deal here though is for Elemental, who will have a chance to have their Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, and Lava Burst overload. Now you don't get Chain Lightning until level 32, so we'll have a little bit of a wait for that, but Lava Burst being on overload is crazy. And I guess spoilers for Elemental later, yes, you're going to be getting Lava Burst. We'll get to that soon though. Also, can you imagine this for PvP? Shaman could already global you, and now they just got a much higher chance to do so. The final chest rune to cover is Healing Rain. So you select an area 15 yards around a targeted player, and heal all of the target's party every second over 20 seconds. Healing Rain feels like one of those Shaman abilities they have had forever, but it didn't come into the game until Cataclysm, and during that expansion it ticked every 2 seconds over a 10-second duration, so our vanilla version in that regard is in some ways a lot more powerful. I'm going to assume it can't crit however, because similar ground targeted effects do not do so, but if there's a group of allies that are stacked and aren't expected to move all that much, this seems like a pretty good heal to throw down. Now onto the leg runes, starting with Ancestral Guidance. For 10 seconds, 25% of damage is converted onto healing for 3 nearby party members, and 100% of healing is converted to damage on the most recent Flame Shock target. This is another talent from a later version of the game, but as usual it's been changed quite a bit. The damage converted to heal just seems okay. There aren't too many situations where you specifically need 3 party members getting loads of heals, so may not be taken too often for this reason. Converting 100% of heals to damage though, I'm not gonna lie, that's a lot. Imagine in PvP you're hitting a Resto Shaman, and they pop Ancestral Healing and then Nature's Swiftness a Healing Wave, and if that crits they're gonna hit you back for about 50 to 75% of your health. That is pretty spicy, and you don't expect to get near enough global by a healer, that's for sure. All in all, Ancestral Guidance seems like a bit of a niche flex pick, as the leg runes have some real powerhouses available. Next we have Earth Shield, protects the player, reducing channeling or cast time loss by 30% and causing attacks against them to heal a small amount. An interesting option for both PvP and PvE. I'm going to assume 1 Dispel removes 1 charge, similar to how it was in TBC, instead of Wrath where 1 Dispel removes the whole ability. The reason I think this is because they've halved the number of charges down from 6, as it was in TBC, to 3 here. Also, Priest and Shaman can both remove 2 magic effects at once through offensive dispels in vanilla. All the same, it is very solid dispel protection, and with how many effects are magical, often including consumables, this seems quite good. Reducing the loss of cast time is something that all casters would benefit from. For example, a Warlock with Earth Shield and Talented Drain Life would suffer 0 channeling loss on that ability. In PvE, it's a nice bit of passive healing on any target. You would have to be refreshing it quite often though. Now we have Way of Earth. This is the big rune you'll be taking to give your Shaman some real tanking ability. While Rockbiter is active on your main hand, you deal 100% increased threat, have 30% more health, take 10% reduced damage, and 6% less chance to be crit by melee attacks. Earth Shock becomes your taunt, has a separate cooldown from other shocks, and is changed to a melee range ability. So yeah, that's pretty much everything you could have wanted from a tanking stance, to be honest. Maybe even on easier bosses, there is a dual-wield Way of Earth build, kind of like Fury Prot from Vanilla. After all, tanking in Vanilla is all about threat generation. Doesn't matter if you don't take any damage if you can't hold threat. And with how much every class has been buffed, tanks are going to need to put in overtime. Shaman threat was already not too bad, between Earthshock and Rockbiter having bonus threat modifiers, Fire Nova for AoE and all of that good stuff. Mind you, Shaman will get another AoE tool, which we'll talk about in a moment. Finally on the legs we have Shamanistic Rage. So if you aren't tanking, this seems as though it's the big winner for the leg runes. It reduces all damage taken by 20%, and you regenerate mana based upon your strongest stat, between attack power, healing power, or spell power over 15 seconds. Now at level 25, as good as this may seem, it's not going to be giving you much mana back. Even if you had 100 spell power at 25, which, unless there's a lot of crazy new items, you won't, that would only be 150 mana regenerated. So to be honest, early game seems more of a defensive tool, but this will scale well as we progress later into the game, and of course is another very nice tool for the Shaman in PvP. Finally, we have the gloves. Molten Blast is a new ability which is aimed more towards a tanking style of gameplay. It blasts all enemies in front of you for fire damage and causes high threat. Flame Shock periodic damage also has a chance to reset this ability. So that is your AoE threat for tanking ticked off then. It seems as though the Shaman tank has a very well-rounded toolkit. Possible uses for enhancement on AoE or dungeon-focused gameplay, but that bonus threat modifier might be a problem for them. Or maybe for enhance, you'd rather take Lava Lash. Another recognizable ability from Wrath of the Lich King, instantly deals offhand damage that does bonus damage if imbued with Flame Tongue. This would seem to be catered more towards a melee DPS enhancement dual wield kind of gameplay, but there is no reason you couldn't take this on a tank if you're dual wielding, and either you just don't need Molten Blast or AoE threat, or perhaps there is another tank doing the AoE role, and you just care about blasting main tank threat as much as possible. Remember, Way of Earth is gonna work as long as there's Rockbiter on your main hand weapon. Someone needs to come up with a name for this Fury Prot version of Enhance. If I know vanilla tanking, I know threat is king, and if enhancement can, they will be dropping their shield now and again. Moving on to Water Shield, this one will be more often than not for the Resto Shaman enjoyers. It grants 1% max mana per 5 seconds, and a further 4% of your max mana when you're hit. Though this very well may be good for other specs too, if mana is that much of an issue. But honestly, outside of restoration gameplay, the biggest use is probably just going to be to smooth out leveling, as that's one of the areas of gameplay where you're constantly getting hit, and can really maximize the bonuses from this. And last but not least is Lava Burst. Yes, Shamans in Vanilla are getting Lava Burst, and it can overload. There is no way this is not OP in PvP, by the way. And pretty amazing in PvE as well. You know how Elemental Shaman's level 40 talent, Elemental Mastery, guarantees a crit, and that is such a powerful effect that it is their final talent? Well, what if you just guaranteed a crit on a basic spell? Surely that will be fine, right? Also, I'm just saying you will be able to Elemental Mastery and get a double crit from Lava Burst into Earth Shock without Flame Shock up. Assuming Lava Burst does do more damage than Chain Lightning, that is. The interaction of this double crit from Elemental Mastery was not due to spell batching. It was an intended gameplay mechanic that got removed in the Burning Crusade. So yeah, this ability is going to be insane for the Shaman. They're going to be an absolute terror in all areas of content. So let's get on some overall thoughts for the Shaman and their runes so far. The tanking set seems to have gotten everything it could have asked for. Mana regen, more armor, bonus threat, a taunt, AoE threat. It seems genuinely good. What I am excited to see though is whether a Fury Prot type enhancement tank will arise as we progress into the season. As for DPS enhancement, I will admit I wanted to see two-handed enhance. All the same, dual wield tends to be fairly good DPS in this game, I don't think they will be as amazing as some other dual wield specs, as they are lacking spell damage scaling on a bunch of abilities, but if you do enjoy that dual wield enhancement gameplay, then you can look forwards to that. Oh, and don't forget, you don't have Wind Fury at level 25, so you're going to have to find a Feral Druid for that. Resto seems solid. No Chain Heal is hurting them for the level 25 bracket, but once we hit 40, Overload Chain Heal is going to be overpowered. I have no doubt about that. And Elemental feels as though it is the big winner here with Overload and Lava Burst. I will say, however, Elemental is missing so many good talents at level 25, including cast time reduction on spells, bonus crit on spells, and of course, Elemental Mastery. So I think they'll feel quite slow to play, and you really won't get a good sense of how they will be yet. But once we hit 40, you could add no new further runes to Elemental, and it is just one of the best PvP specs in the game, and should also do very respectably in PvE. I also like overall how there is so much flexibility between these Shaman runes as a whole. With some other classes, there are rune packages which you would only really ever play together. The Shaman has options and choices, some of which may not be entirely obvious yet. So from that point of view, this is why I think Shaman is so interesting so far in Season of Discovery. The Paladin has always been a hugely popular class within World of Warcraft, and with so many legendary figures to establish their long and storied lore, it's not hard to see why. However, when we got down to the gameplay, Paladins often found themselves being funneled into one playstyle which was accepted: healing. It's always been the Paladin memeing classic. You play the righteous holy warrior who ends up going from one snazzy blue dress in phase 1 as their bis, and ends up replacing it with another equally blue dress come AQ 14. It would be amazing if Blizzard made another blue dress from BFD, by the way. But aside from just healing, protection suffered from a lack of taunt, mana issues, and general itemization problems, whereas Rek kind of just stood there and auto-attacked, something which they've become very familiar with since they started their journey at level 1, and come late game that doesn't quite cut it anymore. So in Season of Discovery, the Paladin is a class that is very much in a place where it could have a few more new and fun abilities added. And, well, Blizzard have gone all out with the Paladin's toolkit, and given them more than you could have possibly wished for. With all that said, let's take a look at the known Paladin runes up to level 25 in Season of Discovery. And we're starting off with something very interesting, the Seal of Martyrdom. This rune was actually changed up quite significantly during the PTR, in a way which makes this part of the video worth redoing. It used to hit 3 targets for 30% weapon damage, and converted 2% of all damage taken to mana. This made it both attractive to rep paladins for the damage, as well as protection paladins, as you would have been able to have a bit of cleave while tanking, but also because it restored mana based on all damage taken. This new version has changed quite a bit though. Now it only hits 1 target for 30% weapon damage a swing, but returns 10% of the damage taken from the seal as mana. The Judgment still causes an instant 70% weapon damage, which is obviously very good, and also has the same bonus mana regeneration effect. The damage from both parts of this seal should be able to crit as well, so it will still be pretty good damage, but on single target, it's going to be competing now with Seal of Command, and there is also another rune on your chest that will now easily outpace this on AoE. I think whether this is taken really depends on how it compares with Seal of Command, because to be honest, it's not going to be restoring a ton of mana, because it's only damage received from the seal now, not all damage. There is also the odd chance that we could be getting seal twisting in Season of Discovery as well. Seal twisting was something which was popularized during TBC for Retribution Paladins, and it involved changing between Seal of Command and Seal of Blood, just as a melee swing landed, which would give you a chance to proc both on hit effects from your seals at the same time. I played a ret for a good portion of TBC, and I really liked this mechanic. I thought it added a lot to ret's gameplay, so I'd be down to see this make a return. However, I do find that people either really love or hate this mechanic, but when everything lines up with Wind Fury procs and you hit about 6 times in one global, it just feels good to pull off. I'd take it over how Ret plays in Wrath any day, but that is just me. Anyways, speaking of Wrath, here's our next chest rune, Divine Storm. Instantly hit 4 nearby targets for high damage, and then heal 3 party or raid members. And suddenly no Ret wants to take Seal of the Martyr anymore. We all already know how good this ability is, and AoE was a weak point for Ret Paladins. I mean, to be fair, the whole spec was a bit of a weak point in PvE. But anyway, you get Divine Storm if you want to take it. In my opinion, this ability is a bit on the powerful side for vanilla, and just feels as though it's better Whirlwind. But hey, it's a seasonal server. We'll see how it goes. Next is Horn of Lordaeron, the first of several abilities that will have Shaman players saying, hey, that looks familiar. So it's basically what Strength of Earth Totem became since TBC, or what Horn of Winter does in Wrath of the Lich King. In vanilla terms, it's Strength of Earth and Grace of Air on one button. However, it is exclusive with Blessing of Might. Saying that, this is just better Blessing of Might. Primary stat scale with Kings and World buffs much better, and Might is only melee attack power in vanilla, so hunters could not benefit from it. Expect your Holy Paladins to be rolling with this rune for your chest. Last but not least, for the chest we have Aegis. So this one is a bit strange. I almost wish they just went and changed the readout talent instead, but no other talents have changed in Season of Discovery, so it would have been a bit strange. If we get readout and Aegis side by side though, you can see the difference is Aegis increases block value by 30%, and makes it so melee and ranged attacks have a 10% chance to increase block chance by 30% for 10 seconds or for 5 blocks. Whereas with Readout, you need to receive a critical strike in order to get that block chance bonus. Now, Protection Paladins and Warriors are the 2 tanks who don't get crit immunity from boss level monsters in their new runes in Season of Discovery, so the plate wielding tanks still may have to factor this into their gearing on the harder hitting content. I guess this rune is looking a bit more long term for the game mode, or maybe there is newer gear that has a bunch of defense on and you can still get crit immune quite easily. Oh, and also 30% block value is a pretty big chunk. Assuming there are some solid sources of block value to scale with on new items, Paladin dungeon grinding or boosting should very much be on the menu. On to our leg runes next, and we have some absolute bangers to cover here. First is without a single doubt the best raid-wide cooldown from Wrath of the Lich King, Divine Sacrifice. However, it's been modified for vanilla, so let's check it out. 30% of damage taken by party members within 30 yards is redirected to the Paladin for 10 seconds. If the Paladin goes below 20% health, this effect will break, and the Paladin will gain 10% increased damage and healing for 10 seconds. Okay, so that is not bad. In Wrath, it's notable that this ability gives the Paladin 2 different buffs, one for the damage reduction and another for the damage transfer. You have to create a macro to cancel the damage transfer, as in Wrath of the Lich King, this buff is raid-wide. So if you don't have bubble, the damage transfer basically just one-shots you. If this is one buff, you better be real careful about pressing this ability if your party is about to take heavy damage. Then again, if you're able to break it under the 20% health margin, you get a bit of bonus damage and some extra healing for a little bit. It seems a bit risky and nowhere near as powerful as the Wrath version, as this is party only. Great for PvP though, as it's both a damage reduction effect and protection from long duration CC as well. Next we have, well, Tremor Totem to be honest, but for Paladins. Why is the Paladin version always better it seems? But just as Tremor Totem does, Inspiration Exemplar occasionally removes fear and sleep effects on party members, but instead of it being a physical item like a totem, it's just an aura around the Paladin. Again, for PvP, you can kill a Tremor Totem, then fear a Shaman real quick, but you can't turn this aura off. So certain CC effects will just be ineffective against Paladins who take this. I will say there is one big difference between this and Tremor Totem actually, and that's Tremor also removes charm effects, and despite charm effects being quite uncommon, that is a bonus for the Horde version. Up next is a big ability for Protection Paladins. It's a snap aggro tool, something to pull from range, and just a cool looking ability. Avenger's Shield. It seems from what I could find online, we're also getting an instant cast version of it too. I was thinking at the start this would be the TBC one, which for some reason had a cast time, which made it completely unusable during combat because when you're getting hit by enemies, you get spell knockback and you can't dodge, block or parry, so that was no good. But assuming it is instant, this is big for prop paladins. In vanilla, they desperately needed something or just anything to be able to pull from more than 10 yards away. Just watch out with this ability, sometimes sometimes it doesn't always bounce where you expect it to. It's a lot easier to chain pull than you would think, that's all I'm gonna say. Next is another one for the ret enjoys, and that is Exorcist. Now Exorcism can be cast on any target and has a 100% crit chance versus undead or demons, which is okay. Exorcism is pretty mana heavy for the amount of damage that it causes. Guaranteeing a crit though perhaps makes this worth it, but as far as we know it doesn't scale with attack power effects. Still, as a ret, you'll either take this or the following rune I'll talk about. Off topic here, but I hope later on one of the runes makes Hammer of Wrath usable in Season of Discovery. It's always been such a fun spell, but it's just so bad in vanilla it's unreal. There would have been no point putting a rune in for it yet though, because you don't get it to level 44. But next up we have Rebuke, and Retribution just got an interrupt. How about that? It appears to be a 10-second cooldown, 2-second lockout. This ability was from Kata originally, but is now an option for rets in vanilla. Depending on how much mana you go through as a ret, this will be a strong consideration for your glove runes that we know at the moment. Also, this is such a mind game in PvP, not knowing whether or not the other guy has an interrupt, and do you need to fake cast or not. I wonder if add-ons will be able to read which runes you have in advance. Just a thought. And finally, we have our glove runes. We'll start with one of the most powerful talents from Wrath of the Lich King's Holy Paladin, Beacon of Light. Places a beacon on the target that copies all healing done to that target. This essentially straight up doubles your healing potential. Similar to Wrath, I imagine this thing will be on the main tank and will allow you to spread your heals across the raid a little more evenly rather than just always focusing on that one target. Very powerful rune for Holy Paladins though. They were already so good in vanilla, this is really pushing their power level. Next for Retribution is Crusader Strike. Originally introduced in the Burning Crusade, this was the button that freed you from just auto-attacking, and now it has an upside in that it regenerates a small bit of your max mana as well. This was the very first rune teased at BlizzCon, and as far as I know you'll be getting this at level 2. This is probably the only rune in the game I can say that for, but it's an ability, we all know what it does. It's just a simple instant attack and a button to feel good about pressing when it comes up. And our final Paladin rune is Hand of Reckoning. It's taunt for a Paladin in vanilla. Only took 19 years. Better late than never though, right? Also, while you have this rune, Righteous Fury threat is increased to 80%. You gain mana equal to 25% of the amount you receive as healing from others, and when below 35% health, you take 20% less damage. So if you add improved Righteous Fury on from your talents, Protection Paladins are going to be doing a bonus 130% holy damage threat. Yeah, so I'm thinking Prot AoE is going to be pretty good in Season of Discovery. Turning healing received from allies into mana is the fix that was implemented in TBC, and it now means that Prot Paladins are able to focus on spell power for threat, and defense, stamina, and so on for tankiness. This really is everything your Protection Paladin needs to succeed in vanilla. What is also worth a mention here is the protection tanking meta that did exist in Classic during 2019 and beyond. Basically, players found out you could spam Greater Blessing of Kings, and it would generate enough threat even to be able to main tank. The Greater Blessing of Kings spam just got a very big buff here, both from its Holy Threat modifier and the fact that Protection essentially has infinite mana now if they are taking damage. Saying that, Greater Blessing of Kings is a level 60 spell, and we don't have any Greater Blessings at all until level 52 with Might and Wisdom at 54. But I'm just saying this could be a thing, and you should expect people to experiment with it when we get to the 50 bracket in Season of Discovery. Anyways, let's cover some closing thoughts on the state of Paladin in Season of Discovery so far. So yeah, this class is insane. That is the summary. Ret got Divine Storm and Crusader Strike on top of having Seal of Command proccing for extra damage, and depending on their mana bar, which hopefully won't run out, they should be doing much better as a whole. Holy got some of the most powerful abilities from Wrath of the Lich King. They were already in a great spot, and they just got so much better. You won't see the full extent of Holy's output to level 40 because they're missing some talents, such as Illumination. Nevertheless, if it's a playstyle you enjoy, it's been improved for sure. Protection seems as though it's the biggest winner for me. Mana problems have been solved, you have a way to pull from range, you have a taunt, you have better threat generation. It just ticks all of the boxes. You do still have to invest 11 points into the Holy Tree to get Consecration in vanilla. It's not a baseline ability, but that's something you'll be more than happy to do. I'm expecting to see a metric ton of players on the Retribution Paladin though. It's one of those specs in the game that when it's even moderately good, it's overplayed. I also hope to see plenty of people trying out the new Protection Paladin. Mixing an actual protection tank that works with vanilla itemization should be interesting to see how you can max out either mitigation stats or spell power for threat. Holy Paladin remains very good, and healer mains will definitely be wanted both for their throughput and the new utility spells in Season of Discovery. The Warrior was the undisputed king of World of Warcraft Classic on its re-release back in 2019. It was without a doubt the single best damage dealer in the game, whilst also being the best tank. And it wasn't as though they were just a little bit ahead either. The difference between what a warrior was capable of doing versus any other class was an absolute landslide. So in Season of Discovery, Blizzard have a careful job to do. They need to add to the warrior without once again just creating a beast which is unmatched in any area of content. And it's true that every single class has received some pretty sizable buffs which we already know of, but with how far ahead the warrior already was, I do wonder whether they will retain their #1 spot in the long run. Either way, we have runes to talk about to find this out, so let's make a start on the chest runes first. Flagellation is the first one to mention. Gain a 25% bonus to physical damage for 12 seconds after having activated Blood Rage or Berserker Rage. Okay, so Warrior is still going to be the best DPS at 60 then, wrap it up, that's all we needed to know. Okay, for real though, we aren't going to be level 60 for some time. We'll start at level 25 in Season of Discovery, and at that level, we won't even have access to Berserker Rage. That's a level 32. We will have Blood Rage though. Either way, this lines up well with the DPS cooldowns that the Warrior will already get later on down the line. Death Wish is 30 seconds for example, and you can back-to-back press Berserker Rage into Blood Rage for 24 seconds of uptime on this rune. So at level 25, I don't think this rune will be that interesting, but it will have great potential at the 40 bracket and beyond. Next is Blood Frenzy, a rune that's going to scale up your rage regeneration the more bleeds you have running, with each bleed tick granting 3 rage. Is Rend now a button that you want to press? I mean, maybe it is, but it doesn't scale with weapon damage or attack power, and it can't crit. And it most certainly doesn't proc overpower the way it does in Wrath of the Lich King. And once we're super late game with world buffs and weapon skill, that kind of solves your rage generation problems. There could be the spot somewhere around level 40 to 50 where this is playable, where you have Sweeping Strikes and Whirlwind, but outside of Deep Wounds, Warrior Bleeds just aren't that great. Maybe this is more tailored for a rune we're going to get later on though. Next we have Raging Blow, an instant strike for 100% weapon damage which can only be used whilst an Enrage effect is active. So we've already mentioned Blood Rage and Berserker Rage, and Enrage itself is a talent that's only in the Fury Treeing Classic, and you need to receive a crit in order for it to proc. However, there is a new rune that's going to give you access to a brand new Enrage effect that will be a lot more consistent, and to be honest will have to be taken alongside this rune for it to be viable. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and bring these up side by side so you can see how they work together. The leg rune I'm talking about is called Consumed by Rage. Enrages you and grants a 25% melee bonus for 12 seconds or 12 swings after you exceed 80 rage. So you're probably going to rage cap fairly often using this, but for a 25% melee damage buff, yeah, that is a pretty good trade-off. This should also have enough uptime to ensure that you can press Raging Blow off of cooldown too, giving the two runes a nice synergy between one another. Also at level 60 with world buffs, this is just a flat 25% damage buff for Fury Warriors. Our final chest rune is Warbringer. Your charge, intercept and intervene abilities are now usable in combat, in any stance, and will remove movement impairing effects when activated. Now this is exciting for PvP enjoyers. Notice it says intervene too. Either that's just been left on the talent text from Wrath of the Lich King, or we're getting intervene at some point, because as far as we know, there is currently no intervene rune. This rune started as a talent from Wrath of the Lich King, but it's great for the exact same reasons in vanilla. Being able to freely charge regardless of stance and keeping your rage is a very nice buff. And as for PvP, I mean, do I have to say how good it is to be able to charge out of a Frost Nova? You know warriors are already going to love that. On to the leg runes now with Furious Thunder. It's just a great bit of quality of life for prot warriors once again. One of the big issues with protection in vanilla in general is that Thunderclap was only usable in battle stance, and it was a super important debuff to have active, and those moments when you needed to change stance to reapply it could cost you so much rage. But now you can clap away in defensive stance and get an even better debuff alongside it. Pretty simple change, but one that warrior tanks are going to be very happy about. The next leg rune is Frenzied Assault, so I guess the news here is that Blizzard are trying to push two-handed warrior DPS, and maybe not even just as arms. Even during vanilla, on the Horde side with Wind Fury, players were already experimenting with a two-handed Fury spec. It just never really could catch up with what dual-wield Fury was capable of. But a straight-up 20% attack speed buff is only 10% less than the Flurry talent in the Fury tree as a totally passive effect. You combine this with both factions getting Blessing of Kings and Wind Fury, and I think there is quite a bit of room for experimentation here. And now we have our glove runes. Victory Rush is the first one up. And this is the version you've probably been wondering where it is since the Burning Crusade when we first got this ability back. I think most of us will remember Victory Rush at some point throughout WoW's history has healed you. Turns out it didn't start doing that until Cataclysm, and the Cata version is essentially what we are getting here. This is just a leveling rune really, but since we know enemies in the open world are going to be doing extra damage, this should help warriors stay even. Next we have Endless Rage. Straight up generate 25% more rage from all damage you deal. This is going to be a great rune when warriors have a bit less gear and can't go from 0 to 100 rage every 2 melee swings. It will also be very useful when it comes to proccing Consumed by Rage, as it will ensure both the enrage effect is rolling as well as the 25% physical damage buff. I was going to say this would be of interest to two-hand DPS warriors too, but they have another rune more tailored to them on the gloves, which is Quick Strike. This is an instant attack, which is more or less just a replacement for where Heroic Strike would have been for two-handed warrior DPS, as now you have another instant ability to press, and your next auto attack will generate rage instead of being used on Heroic Strike to spend it. I have to say this whole two-handed package is shaping up to be pretty interesting, though I still wonder if it can compete with dual-wield Fury in the long run. And I say that because Fury is getting single-minded Fury. The passive 10% physical damage is already good, but they get 10% movement speed on top of that. Movement speed on boots was already a strong consideration for warriors, just so if the target moved you could stick on top of it really easily and have zero downtime. And if you're dual wielding on DPS, this is just a no-brainer to pick up once you start getting into PvE content. Finally, we have Devastate. It's Sunder armor, but a lot better. It's Blizzard saying, okay warriors, we actually want you to be using a shield now, instead of this whole prot Fury thing you had from vanilla. And this version of Devastate is pretty insane. Sunder also deals 100% weapon damage, increased by 10% per application of Sunder. So prot warriors can spam a 150% weapon damage Sunder, and all of a sudden it looks as though even tanks will be doing decent damage this season. Also, real quick on the subject of warriors tanking, using shields and actually doing damage, there was a little something data mined about a Gladiator Stance shield passive. So Gladiator Stance, if you don't know, was a sword and board warrior DPS stance that was briefly available during the Warlords of Draenor expansion, before it was nerfed quite heavily in WoD and removed in Legion, and it's never been seen again. So it would be really hyped to see this return for Season of Discovery. And those are all of our warrior runes, so let's cover some thoughts on the warrior so far. The two-handed DPS build could very well be for arms, or it could be for Fury. It's going to have to be tested once realms go live to see which one beats out the other. But either way, this playstyle has received some serious support from Blizzard this season. I just hope that it can keep up with Fury. Speaking of Fury, once you are level 60, you just have a flat 35% damage buff and can activate a 25% damage buff for 12 seconds every so often. So yeah, I don't think Fury is going anywhere when it comes to finding themselves towards the top of the DPS meters. Time will tell on that though, because level 60 is still so far off. We're going to be starting the season at level 25, and at level 25, warriors are missing perhaps the most out of any of their kit, of any class in the game. They don't even have Berserker stance. So during the first part of the season, I don't see warriors putting up anywhere near the numbers that they usually do on the DPS meter. Protection seems good with a combination of perhaps Warbringer, Furious Thunder, and Devastate. They also have a decent amount of their toolkit by level 25, so I can see this being the warrior specialization, which is the best performer at the start of the season. Definitely watch out for warrior once we start hitting those later levels though. They are known to be a scaling machine, and we haven't even seen all the runes which we are getting. If you want to relive that endless rage ability spamming warrior dream at 60, I'm pretty sure you will still be able to find that familiar gameplay. Who knows, maybe even earlier than expected. But as for whether you'll still be so far ahead on the DPS, you know, after reading through some of these runes so far, maybe you just will be. But those are my thoughts on the warriors runes so far. What do you reckon about what this class has received at the moment? Happy with it? Or would you like to see a bit more? Let me know below. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.